Okay, so here we are. You should be able to only see my screen without my notes. Okay, well, I hope it's all looking properly. It's kind of hard on my end to see if it's working, but let me know if there's any issues hearing or seeing me throughout. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Kelly. I am a naturopathic doctor. I practice in Toronto. And I focus my practice on women's health. So I deal with a lot of hormonal concerns, women who are struggling with PCOS, PMS, period issues, erratic periods, but also seeing more and more women who are trying to get pregnant and struggling to get pregnant, particularly women who are in their later 30s, and also several women who are struggling with recurring miscarriages. So this is something I've become really interested and passionate about treating. And I find that I just don't have a lot of time to talk to women through what egg quality actually means and all the things they can do to improve it. So that's why I wanted to put on this webinar so I can get that information to everyone. So it's going to be very educational, informational. We're going to start by going a little bit back in time to grade 8 biology class and doing a little bit of a science lesson, but then it's going to get more practical as we go along. If you have any questions at all, you can type it in the chat box and I can take some time at the end to answer any questions as best as I can. So this is the plan. So we're going to start by going through what egg quality actually means, because it's kind of a buzzword we hear all the time. But what does that actually mean? I'll take you through the science of what it means. We'll go through how you can estimate egg quality and egg reserve through some basic blood work. Egg reserve is the number of eggs you have left. And then finally, we're going to go through how you can preserve and optimize your egg quality through lifestyle changes. And I'll also take you through a few supplements and the research there is on those at the end as well. So to start, I wanted to share this picture because I find this really cool. So at one point, as an egg, we were actually within our mom in utero, within our grandma, which is super, super cool when you think about it, because women are born with all the eggs that they will ever have. So you actually have about 6 million eggs as a baby in utero. When you're born, you have about 1 to 2 million eggs. By the time you hit puberty, you have 300 to 400,000 eggs. And then every cycle, you use up about 1,000 eggs. So many, many eggs actually go through the beginning stages of development. And then only one special chosen egg will actually get to the point where it ovulates and can potentially become a baby. But this is super cool. And if you do end up having a baby and you have a female baby, you are carrying the eggs of your future grandchildren, which I find really fascinating. So we know that women are having babies at an older age than ever before in North America specifically. That's my plan personally. But I'm seeing a lot of women come into my practice who are also planning on having children or older on in life than we used to 40 years ago, where everyone was early 20s. That's just not the case anymore, and that's for a multitude of reasons, the pill being one. And when it comes to egg quality, it is really important to know that the largest factor is age. There's no way of getting around that. As we get older, our egg quality reduces and the number of eggs we have reduces as well. So age is the biggest factor, but it's absolutely not the only factor. So if you are considering having a baby at a little bit of an older age, there are definitely other things you can do to protect your egg quality, knowing that you're planning on having a kid at a little bit older age. This is Janet Jackson. I'm sure all of you know, but I'm sure you can see that there's celebrities now having babies when they're 40, 45, 50. Janet Jackson had a baby at 50. But it's important to know when we see this in the media, a lot of this times these women are using IVF, or even if a woman is 50, is likely using a donor egg, because by the age of 50, our egg quality would be extremely, extremely low in the number of eggs we would have. So if we're seeing these women in the media getting pregnant at 50, it's just important to know that that's not necessarily realistic for all of us. So why does egg quality reduce with age? You know, we know it's harder to get pregnant as we get older. We know that miscarriage rates increase as we get older. And this is two reasons. You have a reduction in the number of eggs, and then you have an increase in genetically abnormal eggs. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But those are the two factors that really play a role. So we see our egg reserve reduce as soon as we're born, and it kind of reduces at a steady rate. It is until around age 37 that we see more a significant shift in egg quality and egg reserve. So before 37, this is definitely something we always want to be looking at and considering it. But post 37, we want to focus on it even more. It's even more important. And this doesn't mean women don't get pregnant at 37. They get pregnant at 37, 38, 39, 40 all the time. It just can take a little bit longer. And you definitely want to focus on egg quality more than, say, if you were younger than 35. When it comes to men, you know, men are fertile for a much longer period of time than women. And this is essentially because they are producing sperm all the time. So they are not born with all the sperm they will ever have. They actually don't start producing it until puberty, and then they're constantly making new sperm. Whereas, like I said, women have all the eggs they will ever have when they're actually in utero. So it's just a bit of a different situation. And frustratingly and kind of annoyingly, men are fertile way, way longer in life. So this is Mick Jagger. I think he had a baby when he was 73, maybe, I'm going to say. But his partner was much, much younger. But that being said, there is some research coming out now that sperm, as men age, sperm quality can reduce, and it can play a role in like miscarriage rates and genetic abnormalities in a baby. So there is an impact in men of age, but they are absolutely fertile for a longer period of time. So now we're gonna do a little bit of a science lesson. So what actually is egg quality? So women's eggs are the largest cell in the human body, which is pretty cool. It's the only cell you can actually see with the human eye. So it's huge compared to other cells. Sperm, in contrast, are the smallest cell in the human body. But because they're so large and they play such an important role, they have an extremely high need for energy. They need tons and tons of energy to survive. And this is where we're going back to like grade 8 biology class. The way a cell produces energy is through something called a mitochondria. And I'm sure we can remember our teacher saying like the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria. And that is obviously true. The mitochondria is what actually produces energy in the form of ATP. And because the eggs are so big and they require so much energy, they have a huge amount of mitochondria. So at ovulation, an egg actually has 300 to 400,000 mitochondria, which is a huge, huge number compared to other cells within the body. Right before ovulation, so right before we ovulate an egg, that egg under a hormonal signal actually splits in two. So right before ovulation, it has a total of 46 chromosomes. And then some hormonal things happen. It splits into two. So it has 23 chromosomes. One gets discarded, and then the one that we ovulate will go through our fallopian tube as 23 chromosomes. And if it meets a sperm, it binds with the 23 chromosomes in the sperm and becomes a 46 chromosome embryo. So right before ovulation, the cell needs to split, and this is a really, really energy intensive process. So it requires tons of energy from the mitochondria to do properly. Eggs that don't split properly end up with an abnormal number of chromosomes. So 22 chromosomes, 24 chromosomes. And if that happens, that egg cannot go on to form a healthy baby, a healthy embryo. And that's essentially what egg quality is. So egg quality is the ability of an egg to divide from 46 chromosomes to 23 chromosomes. So what exactly would impact egg quality then? What would impact the ability of the egg to split properly? Really anything that can cause damage to the mitochondria will and impact the ability of the egg to divide will impact egg quality. So anything that causes oxidative stress, and oxidative stress is essentially damage to the cells, damage to the DNA in the mitochondria. We hear this word a lot. This is like another buzzword, but that's essentially what it is. Anything that will cause damage to a cell. So for example, smoking causes a lot of oxidative stress. In contrast, when we're talking about oxidative stress, antioxidants will combat oxidative stress. So for example, eating lots of vegetables, which have tons of antioxidants, can help combat oxidative stress. An example I like to use when I'm talking with people about this is like guacamole. If you leave out guacamole for half of a day, it will turn brown, it oxidizes. But if you put some lime in it, so in this example, the lime would be the antioxidant, it does not go brown. So obviously that's not exactly what's going on in our body, but just a way to really understand oxidative stress is damage, antioxidants are protective. So how can you go about estimating the quality of your eggs and how many eggs you have left? So I speak to a lot of women and they're like, oh, great, egg quality is important. What is my egg quality? And unfortunately, the only way to test the quality of your eggs is to actually look at them. Because again, we're looking to see, like, does it have a normal number, a 23 number of chromosomes at ovulation? So the way to do that would be essentially IVF, or in vitro fertilization, where we go in, we take a bunch of eggs, and then we actually look at the genetic profile of those eggs. Obviously, that's not really feasible for a lot of people, really expensive, really invasive, definitely not the first thing you're going to start doing when you're thinking about having children. But there's some other simple blood markers that I use to estimate egg quality if someone is concerned or is just like thinking about fertility and wants that information to decide, you know, if they think they need to be having maybe a child earlier on, or if they're okay to push it a little bit later. So the first two blood tests are called FSH and estradiol. So FSH is known as follicle stimulating hormone, and it's a hormone that we produce in our brain, and we send FSH out from our brain into our circulatory system, and it gets to the ovary and it tells the ovary to start developing eggs. And then in response to this FSH signal, our ovaries start producing estrogen, which is also known as estradiol. As we see egg quality reduce, we tend to see both of these levels, so FSH and estradiol levels, start to increase early on in the cycle. And really, the rising levels of these two hormones is indicating that the body is really trying harder to stimulate the eggs to develop in that cycle. So it's almost like someone's knocking on the door, but they're knocking like louder and louder and louder and then yelling at the end, right? So as we start to see these two hormones increase early on in the cycle, that can be a sign that egg quality may be something we want to be a little more intense about looking at or treating if someone's thinking about getting pregnant. Both of these markers you would run on day 3 of your period. Day 3 is the third day of bleeding. And then the third blood marker that I run sometimes if we're talking about fertility in general is something called AMH, and it stands for anti-Müllerian hormone. It is actually a marker of egg reserve, not of egg quality. So it can tell you, it gives you an estimate of how many eggs you have left. It's run by many fertility clinics to determine if a woman is a good candidate for IVF. It naturally declines as we get older. So if you have had this marker run or if you're considering having this marker run, just make sure you interpret it based on your age. And you know, I run this with women if they want to spot check and make sure, you know, they can push off fertility or push off having a baby a little bit later. So it's more of, for me, a way to say like, what is our timeline? But like I said, it's a marker of egg reserve. It's not of egg quality. So women with really low AMH can still get pregnant and do get pregnant all the time, because at the end of the day, you only need one good egg to get pregnant. So if you ever have this run or you consider having it run, just make sure, like, don't get, too obsessed with this number, because it does not mean you cannot have a baby. And you can run it any day of your cycle. Oops. Okay, so now let's get into some of the things we know that can help with preserving and optimizing egg quality as we get older. So these are the things that we know impact egg quality. Age, yes, has the biggest impact. What we eat has an impact, whether we smoke, whether we drink, the quality of our sleep, the environment that we live within, hormones and hormone balance, certain medications, and some autoimmune diseases can have an impact on egg quality. So we're not going to talk all of these because some of them are very specific to you and your health, but we'll talk about a lot of these modifiable factors and what you can do in your life to make sure you're optimizing egg quality as much as possible. So before we get into that, though, I do want to mention something called, well, what I call the 3-month rule. So the process of folliculogenesis, which is an egg developing right before it ovulates or in the months leading up to ovulation, is actually about 3 months long. So an egg will start developing before it ovulates 3 months before we actually see it ovulate. And in those 3 months, it's really, really susceptible to the environment it lives within. So when we're talking about egg quality, or if we're really working on egg quality, you want to be giving your body a minimum of 3 months or 90 days to expect to see any impact. So let's start by talking about diet and lifestyle factors. So in terms of diet, the most protective diet for fertility in general would be the Mediterranean style diet. So that is a diet that's high in fish, lots of healthy fats, tons of bright, colorful vegetables, and low in like processed foods and sugars. Vegetables specifically are probably our best dietary and natural source of vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals, which are all really strong antioxidants. So one of the best things we can do when we're talking about optimizing egg quality is literally just to eat tons of vegetables. So you want to be having about half of your plate at every single meal of the day to be bright, colorful vegetables. Different colors actually have different phytochemicals, different vitamins, different minerals. So you also want to very much like eat the rainbow, eat all the colors, green, red, purple, and really mix it up. Berries and green tea are really strong antioxidants. So eating berries, like a cup of berries every morning, and having green tea instead of coffee is a good option as well. And then spices, so things like turmeric, cumin, ginger, and oregano, these are all very strong antioxidants. So they are protective for the eggs. When it comes to meat, fish is definitely the best. So fish is high in omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, and DHA. So definitely the best source of protein. You want to be having fatty fish about 2 to 3 times a week. And we want to avoid intake of red meat, high intake of red meat, which is more inflammatory and could be potentially more damaging. But particularly meats that are really overcooked and charred. So when, something on the barbecue has that kind of like burnt, charred outer piece, that would be more oxidative in nature. So just avoiding like overcooked red meats and reducing red meat intake in general. In terms of fats, healthy fats we know are super protective. They're very anti-inflammatory to the system, and they're probably protective for the eggs. So again, like fish, nuts and seeds, olive oils are going to be really important to be eating. Walnuts specifically, so there has been some research looking that eating walnuts every day actually has a positive impact on sperm motility, so the movement of the sperm, morphology, so the way the sperm actually look, and can reduce DNA issues. So if you have a male partner, get them to eat some walnuts. And then avoiding trans fats. So trans fats are essentially fats from fried foods, fries, deep fried foods. So avoiding those as much as possible. And then finally, the last dietary consideration is actually blood sugar. So women who have higher blood sugar and higher insulin levels, which is insulin's another hormone that plays a role in blood sugar regulation, they have reduced egg quality compared to women who have very normal blood sugar levels. So that's also something we want to be mindful of. So avoiding excessive sweets and simple sugars in our diet. It's impossible to never have these things, and I'm not saying never eat them, but more just bird's eye view of what you're eating on a daily basis and making sure you're not having a lot of sugar in there every day. To keep your blood sugar really stable, you want to ideally have 3 meals a day with lots of protein. So like a palm-sized piece of protein at every meal, half a plate of bright, colorful, leafy vegetables for all those antioxidants, healthy fat, and then the carbohydrate. So like half a cup to quarters a cup of carbohydrate. And that's going to be the most stabilizing type of meal structure for blood sugar. This is specifically important for women who have PCOS, who tend to have more blood sugar and insulin regulation issues. So sleep also plays a really important role in egg quality. I am obsessed with sleep. So I try to recommend everyone get 8 hours of sleep a night. But there's a lot of research coming out about the impact that melatonin has on egg quality and embryo quality. And melatonin is our sleep hormone, of course, but it's also a really, really strong antioxidant. So the research so far is looking at taking melatonin as a supplement, but we can infer that if we can produce melatonin naturally on our own, that's going to be protective as well. So 8 hours of sleep is definitely the goal. It will reduce inflammation as well, promote proper blood sugar control, and is also helpful for hormonal balance. So if you're trying to figure out what to prioritize in your life, if you can, always prioritize sleep. If you're having issues sleeping, reach out to someone, figure out what the cause is there, because it is so important for your health. But there's a few ways that you can improve your own melatonin production. One is to avoid blue light in the 3 hours before bed. So blue light can impact our body's own melatonin production. So you can use blue light apps on like your phone or your computer, or you can get like the nerdy blue light blockers, or just avoid devices in 3 hours leading up to bed. Reducing your house temperature by 2 to 3 degrees will actually improve melatonin production. Getting in and out of bed at the same time will also help with melatonin production. And then reducing cortisol. So cortisol is our stress hormone, and melatonin and cortisol kind of work in opposition. So if cortisol is high, melatonin cannot get high. And at night, cortisol should be at its lowest and melatonin should be at its highest. But if we're feeling like really stressed and overwhelmed, our cortisol is going to be high, and then we won't get that peak in melatonin. And again, we want melatonin because we know it plays a role in egg quality. So if you're having trouble falling asleep, or you're waking up in the middle of the night, a lot of the times that can be related to cortisol. Anything that's going to calm your body down is going to be helpful to reduce cortisol. So meditation, yoga, journaling to get your thoughts or your anxieties out for the next day can be helpful. And if that's not enough, definitely work with someone who can support you with that as well, because it is so important. Smoking. So we all know smoking's bad for us, but it absolutely plays a role in egg quality. So there's been some research that has compared women who smoked versus women who did not smoke going through an IVF process, and found that women who smoked had significantly lower embryo score and produced fewer eggs. So smoking is absolutely an oxidative stress. So if you are smoking, trying to reduce or ideally quit, trying to find someone who can support you through that process. If you cannot quit, you want to be extra mindful that you're getting tons of antioxidants and doing all the other things we talked about to kind of combat the damage that smoking does from an egg quality perspective. Alcohol, we know alcohol has a negative impact on reproductive outcomes. When it comes to egg quality, we know it causes oxidative stress. It can also increase estrogen levels. But it looks like really moderation is the most important thing. So the research shows that binge drinking, so women who have more than 4 drinks on one occasion frequently, they have reduced AMH levels compared to those who don't drink. So really moderation is really important here. Alcohol also seems to have a negative impact on IVF outcomes. So really when it comes to alcohol, it depends, if a woman has been trying to have a baby for multiple years, then I would maybe be more strict about avoiding alcohol as much as possible. But if you're just thinking about, your fertility down the line, just moderation is the most important thing here. Environmental considerations. So there's a couple chemicals that are very prevalent in our environment that I want to take you through what they are and what you can do best to avoid them. But before I get into that, I just want to say that these things are very prevalent in our environment. You cannot avoid them 100%. It's unrealistic to think you would be able to. So the goal is just to reduce our exposure to these things as much as possible. It's not like a zero interaction with them. It's just to reduce from where you are now. But the first is something called BPA, which stands for bisphenol A. And it was actually produced as an estrogen-like molecule back in the day, but it wasn't strong enough. So then it became used in plastic. So it's used in like the lining of canned foods, in water bottles, and used in cash receipts. And there's a growing body of research showing that BPA has a negative impact on hormones, but also a negative impact on the quality of eggs. So a study that looked at BPA exposure and IVF outcomes, it found that increased BPA exposure was associated with reduced eggs retrieved, lower egg maturity, and reduced fertilization rates and egg quality. So how do you reduce your BPA exposure? So switch to stainless steel or glass water bottles. Limit your intake of canned foods as much as possible. Store foods, leftovers in glass or stainless steel. Avoid heating things up in plastics, and avoid putting plastics through like a dishwasher if then you're going to store like liquids in it specifically. And avoid acidic liquids like tomato sauce being in plastics, because anything acidic is more likely to leach out the BPA into the substance itself. The second environmental consideration is something called phthalates. So phthalates are plasticizers that have hormonal activity. So they have progesterone-like and aromatase activity. And they are used as ingredients in many of our home and personal care products. So in a lot of our beauty products, in like our detergent, those type of things. But studies have found that high exposure to phthalates can have a negative effect on fertility. So one study found that decreases in something called the antral follicle count, which is the number of eggs that are developing, and in patients who had higher phthalate exposure. So again, it's all just about reducing your exposure where you can. We cannot eliminate these completely from our environment. But how do you reduce your exposure to phthalates? So the most important thing is to avoid fragrance. So any product that says fragrance in it, that's like a code word for phthalates. So avoid scented air fresheners, fragrance candles, laundry detergents, those type of things. A lot of our beauty products now, if they're phthalate free, they'll actually write that on that. So look for that on the label. But you can also, there are some great resources now that show you which products are going to be cleaner than others. So the Environmental Working Group has a website called Skin Deep, and I put the link there. But it'll actually it rates every single, not every single, but most beauty products in terms of what is in them and whether they are any risk to our reproductive health. So you can also use that as a resource as you're going through your products. Again, don't go and throw out every product you have ever had. Just as you're replacing things, look out for these things and replace them with cleaner options over time. And then lastly, I want to talk about a few supplements. So there's some interesting research on different supplements and their impact on egg quality. This is not for someone necessarily at the beginning of their fertility journey, just thinking about future fertility and optimizing egg quality. It's more for someone who's trying to conceive. Maybe it's taking longer than expected. Maybe this might be for someone who's over 35 or 37, who we know egg quality is something we really want to focus on. But I by no means would recommend a woman just go out and start taking supplements without knowing why or if she really needs them. So this is just definitely information. When it comes to supplements, dose is really important. The brand and the quality of the product is really important. So definitely talk to someone if you are interested in trying supplements for egg quality or fertility health. But there's definitely some interesting research coming out. So the first is something called Coenzyme Q10. So Coenzyme Q10 is something we produce naturally. It actually lives within the mitochondria and it helps produce energy within the mitochondria. It's also an antioxidant. And of course, antioxidants will combat oxidative stress, so ergo good for egg quality. So studies have found that oral supplementation of CoQ10 can reduce age-induced oxidative damage to eggs, and it has a protective effect. So this is probably the most well-researched supplement when it comes to egg quality. Some fertility clinics, actually most fertility clinics, I would say, are recommending this to their patients now. The second is melatonin. So like I mentioned, there's a growing body of research showing that melatonin is a really strong antioxidant and plays a really important role in egg quality. There's actually melatonin receptors within the ovary itself, which is super interesting. And studies have found that supplementing with melatonin can improve egg quality, can improve embryo quality, specifically in women going through IVF. So melatonin is something that I usually use in my women who are like going through the IVF process, like 3 months before they start going through an egg retrieval. And then the last supplement is something called Myositol. And if anyone knows about PCOS or has PCOS, Myositol is used very commonly in PCOS. It is a B-like vitamin that is helpful for lowering insulin levels and testosterone levels. But there's a lot of research showing that it's really impactful for egg quality too. So if you are someone who has PCOS and is thinking about egg quality, this is definitely something you should talk to a practitioner about if it's right for you. But Myositol has been studied a lot of times in combination with melatonin, and it's been given specifically to women with low egg quality and a poor response to IVF, and has found that it had very positive results. So higher number of mature eggs, improved fertilization rates, and improvements in the number of total and top quality embryos transferred. So that's it for supplements. The last thing I want to mention is sperm health. So if you do have a male partner and you are considering trying to get pregnant now or thinking about future pregnancy, it is important to know that a woman is just 50% of the picture. So I see a lot of people come in and the woman has had like 20 different blood draws, 3 ultrasounds, and their partner's like, I'm just not ready to get a sperm analysis, and that's just not good enough. So like if anyone is having fertility issues, sperm plays a huge role when it comes to fertility. If there are any issues trying to get pregnant, it's like 30% female factor, 30% male factor, and 40% combined. So that it's really important. And honestly, anything we talked about, so like eating the good, clean diet, reducing, quitting smoking, moderate consumption of alcohol, good quality sleep, those are all going to be really positive and impactful for sperm health too. So if you're implementing some of these things and you have a male partner, do it together. It's going to be easier anyway, and definitely going to be helpful for both of you from a fertility perspective. Oh, and here's some additional resource for everyone. So we're kind of coming to the end of the presentation actually. But this is a great book. It's called It Starts with the Egg. And it's very science-based, but easy really to read. I have a lot of patients who've read it before, and it's really about the science of egg quality. and what you can do to optimize egg quality. What we went through today is, kind of like a rushed version of this, but if you want to read through it, understand it in more detail, this is a great read, and not a very long read either. That's the website for Skin Deep. So if you're looking at changing your products over and want to see what's really clean, that's the link there. And that's it. That's my email there, my Instagram handle. So I post about fertility, women's hormones, health in general all the time. So if anyone doesn't follow me, you can follow me there. And then that's my email as well. If anybody has any questions about what we talked about or anything in general, you can contact me through there. Any questions? So a really good question. For women on the pill, past or present, or continuously taking birth control, do they still lose around 1,000 eggs a cycle? That's a really good question. I don't know 100%. I know the pill, it doesn't really protect against egg quality by any means. And I don't see women who are on the pill for a very long time come off and have like really good AMH like when they were really young. So I don't know how many eggs they would use up, but I know it wouldn't like save up your eggs, like it's not like if you were on the pill for 20 years and came off, you would have the egg reserve of a 20-year-old. So I didn't really answer that 100%. Here we go. Another question. Okay. CBD or THC cannabis, any studies on this in impacting egg quality? Yes, actually. So there's been some research, not as much on egg quality, to be honest, on sperm quality. There's been a lot of research showing that cannabis, more smoking it, has a negative impact on sperm quality. I don't know of anything on eggs specifically, but usually when we're looking at those type of things, I infer if it's damaging to sperm, it could potentially be damaging to eggs as well. So smoking cannabis, yes. CBD, I'm not aware of any research of taking like CBD oil if that has a negative effect, because again, you're not smoking it, you're not getting the oxidative part of that. Vaping though, vaping doesn't have a lot of the chemicals in smoking cigarettes, but it has nicotine, and I know there has been some research showing that nicotine can have a negative effect. So vaping still, I would try to reduce or avoid. I've heard multiple times that being on birth control can impact your fertility. Is that true? And if so, what are the factors of birth control that can cause this? This is a really good question. Because there's tons of information on this. So in terms of birth control's impact on fertility, in my perspective, it's not necessarily that the birth control is negatively impacting your fertility, is that a lot of the times it masks an underlying issue. So I see a lot of the time women will have something like PCOS, for example. And if you have PCOS, you have really, really long cycles typically, and you don't ovulate very often. And women, a lot of the times, are put on the pill at a very young age because of this. And then they get cycles every month, although they don't ovulate anymore. So the pill, let me backtrack. The pill essentially shuts down your hormonal system, right? So whenever a woman is put on the pill for any type of hormonal imbalance, it doesn't actually address it. It just shuts it down completely. So I find in those cases, if a woman's been put on the pill for those type of reasons, when she comes off of the pill, all of those issues are still there. And then she might struggle to conceive because none of those issues have been addressed. And it might be like 10 years she's been on the pill. She comes off, maybe she's like in her later 30s. And sometimes it takes a while to get a woman's cycle back if she does have any of those underlying issues. So it can impact it in that way. The other thing is the pill does deplete some nutrients. So like the B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, all of these play important roles in our hormones. They're also, some of them are antioxidants. So if a woman's on the pill for a long time too, like making sure she's taking a really good quality prenatal in advance of trying to conceive is really important as well. What do you recommend as a way to track ovulation to better understand when ovulation occurs? Yeah, so there's a few ways. There's a book called Taking, oh, now I can't remember, Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Tony Weschler. It is, in my opinion, the best resource to monitor and identify when you are ovulating. One of the best ways is cervical fluid or cervical mucus. So at the beginning of your cycle, right after your period, you should have, typically women will start to see like really dry, sticky, tacky cervical fluid. That is not very fertile. But as their estrogen rises, it gets wetter and wetter. So some women will see like a little bit of, it almost looks like water. Your estrogen's rising, that's more fertile, like cervical fluid. And then when cervical fluid starts to get really sticky, almost like gluey, gummy, it's called egg white cervical fluid. That is the most fertile cervical fluid and when you want to actually have intercourse because you're going to ovulate quite soon. So that's a sign of ovulation, the really sticky egg white cervical fluid. But that happens before ovulation. The only way to know 100% if you ovulated in a cycle is to either test your progesterone after when you think you ovulated, or to track your temperature using a basal body thermometer. And you're looking for a significant rise in your temperature that's sustained, and that will mean you ovulated. But definitely take a look at that book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, because it goes into that in a lot more detail on how you can track and determine if you're ovulating and when you're ovulating. What about exercise, like high intensity type running and more? Yeah, so exercise actually tends to be more of an antioxidant, so protective. So exercise is definitely really good. If it's too intense, that may have a negative impact. So I think, again, moderation is really key. Doing like, 5 super intense HIIT workouts a week might not be the best. I would focus more on moderate movement, still break a sweat, of course, but I wouldn't go super, super intense. What dose of melatonin would you suggest? So I definitely can't suggest supplements to people who are not my patients. So I can't really answer that question. But you could take a look at some of the research. So I put the links of the research in there, and you can look at the studies and see the dose that they use. But definitely talk to someone before taking anything, supplements definitely can have side effects too. So just make sure it is the right option for you. Oh, I'm getting so many good questions. Okay. If you take some of the supplements you mentioned and get pregnant, and will they still be helpful in pregnancy? I would, yeah, if you're already taking any of those supplements, I would stop if you get pregnant. The thing with supplements is there's not a lot of research on many of them. There are in some, but there's not a lot of research on using supplements in pregnancy. It's not really ethical sometimes to test things in pregnancy. Is it safe or is it not safe? So when women get pregnant, I get them to stay on their prenatal. If they're on fish oil, but I usually take them off immediately like any other type of supplement. What about the Mirena IUD when periods stop completely? I'm not sure what that question means, to be honest, like in terms of egg quality. So the Mirena IUD, it works more locally, and then it does secrete some hormones, so progestin hormones. Some women continue to ovulate with the Mirena IUD, other women don't. So it really depends case by case. In terms of negative impacts on egg quality, it wouldn't deplete the same vitamins and minerals that the birth control pill would. But if there was an underlying hormonal issue that the Mirena IUD was covering, the Mirena IUD would not address any of those issues. So I wouldn't say it has a negative impact on egg quality by any means. It's just more if it's masking any type of hormonal issue, if that's why you went on it in the first place. Bike riding for men and sperm health. I've heard this can negatively impact. Is that true? Yeah. So if men are doing really intense exercise, anything that's really, really warm, that can be detrimental to sperm. So avoiding like super intense exercise, saunas, hot tubs, and biking, if you're trying to conceive with your partner, that can be helpful. Is melatonin for those who can't sleep or just anyone? No, if I'm working with someone on egg quality, it doesn't have to be if they have issues with sleep. If they do have issues with sleep, you know, kind of like doubly helpful, but no, not necessarily. What is my opinion on NAC? So NAC is another antioxidant called N-acetylcysteine. I love NAC. I use it all the time. I use it in PCOS a lot. Okay. Wow, I'm getting so many great questions. Okay, one more question. A period question. When tracking your cycle for ovulation purposes, how do you recommend knowing what should be considered day one if there's a few days of spotting at the beginning? Spotting would not count as day one. So only count day one as the first day of like bright red blood. That's day one. Do you recommend reducing caffeine intake when trying to conceive? Yeah, I do. Again, like moderation is important. So if someone's having 4 or 5 cups a day, I would say definitely reduce. Do you need to avoid 100%? It depends. So there's research showing that, you know, too much caffeine before IVF can have negative impacts. So if someone's going through like an IVF procedure, which is extremely expensive and stressful, you know, I would say remove it because just to increase your chances as much as possible. If you've been trying to conceive for like a really like a long time and you don't know why, probably worth it to avoid. But other than that, I would just say moderation is really important. So, you know, 1 cup, 2 cups a day maximum, but ideally just 1 cup a day. I know you cannot recommend supplements to non-clients, but there's some brands you could recommend. So it really depends on the supplement. Some of them brands I don't care as much, depending on what it is. Other things like botanical medicines, I'm pretty picky. So it really depends. NFH is a brand I really like though. Any concerns with tampons and the effects on the vaginal health versus pads or Diva cups? Not necessarily. Like if a woman's having chronic infection, sometimes I would recommend not using tampons. Some of them have like bleach in them and whatnot. So using natural versions, chemical-free versions, I would definitely recommend. But no, not necessarily. I think that's it in terms of questions. Wow, amazing questions. I hope I answered those well. I answered them as best as I could. But if anything else comes up, like you can shoot me a message on Instagram, or you can send me an email through my website, and I can answer as best as I can. Or book an appointment with me. That's an option too. Oh, great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope that was helpful. And if anything's not clear, like let me know. I will send the recording and the slides out to all of you as well if you want to review it at any time. Thanks again. Have a good night, everyone.